I watched this really good video that somebody made comparing RuneScape and Albion Online, and I thought, wow, that's a really good video, and I enjoyed it. And then I realized this guy who made the video has very few subs, and I thought, wow, that's crazy that this guy has made such high quality content and he's got no views, really. I mean, he had some, but not anywhere near as many as I would have expected. And then I went to look at his videos some more, and I realized, you know, he made a number of pretty good videos, and then he didn't make any more content for a year or so. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a shame. It's a shame that this guy started off strong out of the gate, made some really good content, and then he just kind of probably got tired of the grind of it, tired of putting effort into making content that takes effort and thought, and then not really getting any views. And, you know, for me, I don't really have that problem so much because I don't really put a lot of effort into making content. Like, I just sit down and talk about stuff while I'm clicking rocks or trees. So it doesn't take a lot of extra time out of my life. It's really just kind of thinking out loud, and I can just be more consistent about it, I guess, without feeling like I'm going to burn out. And I think there's a lot of times in life where we think, well, I want to do that thing. And then we start off and we put effort into it, but then it requires so much effort to sustain that we get tired, we burn out. And then you never really get where you wanted to go because you don't stick it out long enough to actually get traction. And I think that's where you got to look at things not like a sprint, but a marathon. It's the going consistently at a speed that you can sustain, not trying to go as fast as you can right out of the gate. And then you don't burn out, and maybe you don't get results as fast as you want, or maybe even as fast as you should, but at least potentially after other people have given up, you're still grinding. Like, I think about my time playing various MMOs, really, but we'll just say Albion Online because it's a good example. And, you know, I look at my friend list and I realize whenever I've added somebody to a guild or to a friend list, and you look down the list and you see when was they last online, and you realize, well, this person hasn't been online for 2 or 3 years or something. And it becomes really apparent that most people give up. Most people don't stick around. They're just gone. And that's kind of sad in a way. But it just goes to show how so few people really stick around to see things through. And that's where I was just thinking it's so important not to give up, not to get an idea that something would be cool to do, and then you just, at some point you lose interest. At some point you get distracted and you try to shift direction and pivot to something else. And that cycle just continues of never really getting momentum built up for anything. You're just starting something and then heading for the exit before it ever really takes off to go anywhere. So don't turn around midway. Sometimes you've gotta not worry so much about going back to finish everything that maybe you haven't finished, or to go back to everything you've walked away from in the past, because that list is probably too long. But you can make a decision. You know, I'm not going to walk away from things that I've started. I'm not going to give up on good ideas that I really want to see through. And I'm going to make something of the journey that I already have under my belt. And I think it's important there to make a distinction between giving up and adjusting course. It's kind of like a ship. If you're sailing and you realize you're not quite on course and you change direction a little bit to adjust your heading, that's really very different from completely turning around and going back home. So you got to find your sea legs. It's like being on a boat and it tilts all over the place in the water and it's hard to stand up on deck and makes you want to vomit. And then you get used to it and you figure out how to stand up. And then after a while, there's a place where maybe it's not a big deal anymore. It's not hard to stay on your feet while you're on the upper deck of your ship at sea. And if you do it for long enough, then at some point you're the old captain in the cabin and there's other young guys out there who are sailors because you found the courage to stand up and not give up and go home the first time you felt a little bit seasick or a little bit homesick. And there's something to be said for just endurance, simple endurance to not give up along the way. And I think that we look for excuses to kind of lose interest. That's what we do. We get an idea, something that seems like a good idea, and then we realize, you know what, that might require us to address something that's not comfortable to address. And so we'd rather just walk away. We'd rather just say, oh, well, never mind. You know, I guess I didn't care about that anyway, right? It's easier to do that than it is to actually work the problem, to actually address red flags when they're there, to say, you know, I see something that seems like it needs to be addressed. I am going to address it. And I'm not going to just get an idea of something that I should address and then give up and lose interest in it as soon as I realize that maybe I have to go out of my comfort zone a little bit in order to work the problem. There was a guy who I was talking to today at work. He got in some trouble for standing around too much, talking too much, not working well enough, and he didn't like that. And, you know, I told him the number one thing you got to understand is it doesn't make a difference whether you look like you're not doing well or you're actually not doing well. Because the end result is if people look at you and feel like they can't trust you, it doesn't really matter whether you think you're trustworthy or not. You've kind of lost the battle. Like you've got to care about how you carry yourself. You got to care about the sort of behaviors that you are showing off to the world. You've got to also be able to take to heart messages that you don't necessarily like or agree with. And that's a huge one. Because there's so many times where somebody will tell us something maybe, or there'll be something that we need to acknowledge as a truth, and then we don't want to. So we blame somebody else, or we say the message wasn't delivered in a way that we thought was respectful, or maybe we just don't acknowledge the validity of the message at all. Or maybe sometimes something's partially unfair, but it's not entirely untrue. And we don't have the courage to just face that reality and take ownership of it and say, okay, I'm going to check myself. I'm going to correct myself, and then I'm going to do better in some way. We don't want to do that because it requires pulling the blinders off and looking at ourselves, not the way we want to see ourselves, but the way we really are. And that can be a first step toward a journey of self-improvement. But again, it doesn't work if the first time you kind of hit uncertain times or negative feedback or the absence of results, you just blame the algorithm, you blame some external circumstance, and you just kind of are like, oh, well, I guess I gave it a try and it just didn't work out. Well, maybe you have to make a case for why, if you couldn't make it work out the first time, why that is somebody else's fault instead of your own. Like maybe you need to take responsibility by default instead of blaming somebody else or giving up by default. I always think it's interesting when there's people who will say that other people are all out to get them and everybody is bad and the world is evil and all of that kind of a thing. And then I've noticed those same people will also be inclined to say, they'll say, well, I am worthless. I am just a failure. I am no good. And the theme there is that it's easy to say everyone else is out to get you, and it's easy to say that you're just worthless and you don't have any potential. What is a lot harder is finding the courage to say, you know what, I do have potential. I do have quality. And it's also not somebody else's fault if I fail. It's my fault because it's my responsibility to work on myself. And if I'm not doing the things that I want to be doing, that's not somebody else's fault. It is my fault. I have to figure out how to get back up again, or figure out how to not give up in the face of what feels like bad odds. Like these are the kinds of things. They lead to a place where you start to appreciate your life, you appreciate feedback, whether it's positive or negative, you appreciate the challenge, and you aren't always just kind of casually looking for the door to head out at the first sign that something isn't likely to go your way. We just, especially living in a post-digital world where everybody's online and everything's promised to be fast and easy, we struggle to have the tenacity to stick with something, to understand it doesn't have to be perfect in every way. It's okay if it's good in some ways and imperfect in other ways. It's okay to have a life that's boring but also peaceful, or to do something that is maybe not exciting all the time, to just kind of stay the course. And I think whenever you look at anything in life that winds up being something you cherish, it's not so much that you picked the best thing you could have possibly picked. It's that you didn't give up on something. You kept on coming back to that thing that was familiar, and you kept on working on yourself, and you kept on putting effort into that thing. And then after a while, it starts to feel like it's something meaningful. as a part of what shaped your life. And that's, maybe it's just the art of practicing patience and understanding that patience isn't just something happening by default. Patience is something that we actually have to exercise. The patience to not give up whenever we're tempted to have a bad attitude, to not head for the door the minute things get inconvenient, to not always be thinking, you know, is this game I'm playing the best game I could be playing? You know, how easy is it to go to the Steam library and always look to see what is that new thing that's coming out? What's that new thing on sale? And does it really make your experience better? Or do you wind up actually losing that sense of wonder along the way because you're looking for a perfect experience that checks all boxes instead of making the best out of the experience that you already have? And it's so true in the gaming world. That's why there's people who are, you know, World of Warcraft veterans or RuneScape, old school RuneScape veterans or something. And they will talk about how much they love some old game. And you look at it and you think, is this really that great of a game? And it's not. It's just not really that great. But you know what made it really great was that they started playing it at a time when they didn't have an abundance of other options, and then they stuck with it. And then after a while, it started to feel meaningful. And that's the difference. It's not that it's great, it's that it's meaningful. It's like the difference between the, you know, prettiest face in the room and that marriage that lasted for 30 years. You know, at some point, it's not about how pretty somebody is. It's about consistency. It's about patience. It's about forgiveness. It's about getting to a place where you don't feel like it's disposable anymore. And I was talking to my boss the other day, and we're in the car, and we were talking about this lady who had hit 30 years of service with the company. And I said, you know, the crazy thing is that nobody even really cares too much about her 30 years of experience. Like, it's just, it is what it is, you know. And you know, and what he said was, he said, you know what, but we're different, he said, because, you know, those of us who actually had a journey together, we had this experience that started years ago, and we got to know each other, and we got all these stories to tell. And he said it's different if you have one or two or three or four or five people that all kind of have been along for the ride. It's different. It's different if you have a group versus if somebody's just alone and they're traveling along, and yeah, they're there for a long time, but they didn't create the depth of relationships and connections and stories along the way. And you know, that's really true. It's true that it's not just about not giving up. It's also about finding ways to maybe enrich yourself and enrich other people's lives along the way. It's about finding a way to create an experience that feels like it's not just your experience for your own sake. You know, that's why MMOs are so fun for so many people. And yet, if you actually look at the studies that discuss how do people actually play MMOs, you'll find out that most people play them as solo players. And isn't that weird? It's so weird that the most successful MMOs tend to be played by people who play them alone. And a big part of why is because there's a sense that even if you're not sharing your activities with somebody, just the fact that you're part of a world that's shared with other people makes you feel connected to something in a way that a single player experience that's offline just doesn't. You know, like maybe I go play Elder Scrolls Online and I'm in the world, I'm questing by myself, but it's different though. It's different than, you know, playing Skyrim or something where the world is just solitary and empty other than NPCs. So I guess I'm making 2 points here. And one point is you don't want to give up, but then the other point is don't do what you're doing alone. Don't do it for yourself only. Find a way to enrich your life, but also do it in a way that's going to potentially enrich the lives of others. You know, like I get off work, I'm playing a silly game and, you know, I'm just talking about stuff and I don't know that I'm really making a huge difference, but in a way, it's a conversation. It's a conversation that maybe I wouldn't otherwise have. It's something that somebody could hear something and listen to something, and it gives them an idea, makes them feel less alone on some level. And then, you know, you start to have this sense of community. And you have a sense of community when you stop giving up midway and you start to find a niche, something that you can build off of, something you can invite other people into, something that you can make, if not a shared journey, at least a shared experience. You know, I want to say that this whole idea I got of making a channel that was based around talking about life topics, just general discussion, I owe that whole idea to Albion Online. It was the first game that I thought, well, I think it would be cool to make a channel centered around Albion Online. And then I thought, well, you know, how much content could I really get out of Albion Online? And then I started realizing, you know, I guess just talking about stuff, anything, while playing the game would make sense, because the game is kind of boring in a way. It's boring enough that you can just chop trees and talk about whatever you want. So I realized, you know, no game is an infinite reservoir of content, but conversations about life really are an infinite reservoir of content. So why not take games that you can play passively and then use them as a backdrop for topics that are a lot more deep? And so far it's worked kind of well. And in addition to all of the comments that I've received from viewers like you, the slow but steady growth of the channel, I've also found that just turning on the camera and sitting there and talking about things on my mind has helped me as an individual, just because it's a much more enriching and heartening experience than sitting there and staring blankly into space. So even if no one watched, I think I still got something out of it, continue to get something out of it. And so there's that. Anyway, try to find ways to share experiences. Try to find experiences that you can stick with, and don't give up at the first sign of trouble. Sometimes you just got to keep on going. Keep on going when you hit the foggy patch. Keep on going, and in the darkness, in the storm, just carry on doing the things that you started off embarking on a journey to do, and trust yourself that you had a good idea from the beginning, and therefore continue onward till the end. So don't give up. Hang in there. Find positive ways to experience your journey. And maybe life isn't perfect, but consistency does count for something. Anyways, till next time, thanks for watching, as always.